Begin this hour with new details about the Trump administration's plans to deport undocumented immigrants at a large scale. In an interview with NBC News, the incoming border czar, Tom Homan, hinted that a battle could be shaping up between federal and local authorities. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has the details.
The impending clash between the incoming administration and sanctuary cities looks closer to combustion after San Diego's Board of Supervisors approved a measure requiring the feds obtain a judicial warrant for undocumented migrants already in their jails.
Bottom line is I'm shocked at what San Diego did. And bottom line, we're still coming to San Diego when we do our job. Look, it's more difficult, but we're still doing it.
Thomas Homan is President-elect Trump's border czar and the former director of ICE.
You see San Diego's recent actions as having no legal muster, and you're just going to move right through that?
I think San Diego's legal action is going to will be in litigation.
It's the latest salvo in a showdown over immigration policy that also affects cities like San Francisco, Chicago, and New York.
It's unfathomable to hear that the incoming administration wants to devastate over 28 million American families in this country who live in mixed-status households.
Murad Awauda is president of the New York Immigration Coalition. He's also concerned that Trump's controversial family detention policy may be back on the table.
You need to understand, it's not in we say detention, but it's not in a jail setting. This is actually an open-air campus family type facility that is open air, right? So we're not talking about razor wire and a penal institution, things like that. They have child care, they have education and programs.
There is no such thing as a soft detention site. There's no humane way of detaining children in prisons, because that's what it ends up becoming, even if it's a tent structure.
President-elect Trump has promised deportation on a mass scale starting as soon as he steps into office, as concerns over family separations remain high.
Do you worry, though, that you will actually be separating children from their parents and punishing children for the actions of their parents?
Our plan, we have no plan to separate children from parents. The parents will have to make a decision. That's parenting 101. I'm going to say it again. If you choose to have a child here in the United States while you know you're here illegally and you know you're on a court order to deport, that's on you.
A 2023 consent decree between the Biden Department of Justice and the ACLU banned family separations for 8 years.
Do you believe the decree needs to be reexamined?
I think, yeah, we need to re-examine that, see if it makes sense from a national security perspective.
That was NBC's Sam Brock with that report. Carlos, let's get your reaction to this. I mean, the way describing these detention centers, the way that understanding that implicitly that this is going to really sort of change the fabric of American society if indeed they move to this deportation plan at the numbers they have promised. What's your early read here now, just a month until Trump takes office and apparently puts these policies into effect?
Jonathan, I think we have to understand that right now, President Trump and his incoming team, they have a lot of momentum on the immigration issue. This was probably Trump's strongest issue during the campaign. It was the weakest issue for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Democrats. Democrats are on defense on this issue. They moved just months ago to supporting one of the most conservative immigration measures in Congress in recent years. So the narrative here has changed. The public's position has changed. I would tell you that 5-10 years ago, there was a greater tolerance, acceptance of illegal immigration in the country. Right now, even in large cities, despite what you hear from immigration activists, a lot of the public wants to see this issue dealt with. So I think the incoming administration, the incoming president and his team will have a lot of latitude, a lot of leeway. Of course, can they overstep? Can they overreach? Can they come across as cruel the way Trump did during the first administration with a child separation policy? Yes, and at that time, things might change. But for now, I think we have to understand that the American people, broadly speaking, want to see some strong action on immigration.
Yeah, it's certainly true that the country has moved to the right. People didn't love it when they saw families being separated during the first Trump administration. It's going to be interesting to see whether there is more tolerance for that, should it happen, even with a country that's become more draconian on illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, Politico has a new report that California farmers who voted for Donald Trump are now worried that he could deport half of their workers. Quote, California farmers could soon enjoy bumper crops thanks to President-elect Donald Trump's pledge to lift water restrictions. But who's going to pick them if he follows through on his deportation threats? At the same time, the Wall Street Journal is out with a new report about the U.S. car industry having a big case of anxiety about the president-elect's proposed 25% tariff on imports from both Mexico and Canada. The Journal points out, quote, finding an affordable car in the U.S. has already become a challenge for many budget-constrained Americans. New import tariffs on Mexican-built vehicles threaten to make the problem worse. There is also a new report in the Washington Post on a growing number of low-income Americans who also voted for Donald Trump, who now say they are hoping he won't slash the government benefits on which they depend. Many are concerned about the president keeping their benefits intact after several of his cabinet picks and Republican lawmakers have called on Trump to reduce federal spending. That includes Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are leading the new Department of Government Efficiency that we spoke about earlier. The Washington Post points out that the two have said they want to cut $2 trillion from the government's annual budget. Some experts say the only way that can actually be accomplished is by slashing entitlement programs. So, Rev, I mean, there was a lot of discussion of this during the campaign, how much people might vote for Donald Trump and then realize that some of his policies may not actually benefit them in the way they thought they would. I think there was so much conversation during the campaign about the kinds of things that Donald Trump was proposing, whether it was deportations that affect farmers, tariffs that affect people who are buying cars, that it's hard to say to voters, this should come as a surprise to you, isn't it?
It should not come to voters as a surprise. But I think when the rubber meets the road, now that we're actually talking about mass deportations or detention centers that are going to have to be paid for, extra personnel that is going to have to be paid, states that are going to tie this up in court, and then you go from there to tariffs and the impact of that. People are starting to say, wait a minute, like you say, the people in California, well, who is going to deal with the whole system of how I do my business on the farms? Or how are we going to handle these things on a practical matter? So when the emotions come out of the campaign and the reality sets in, I think that it will be predictable that the Trump administration, incoming administration, will overstep the bounds of where people thought it wouldn't impact them. And then when you get down to entitlement programs may have to be talked about to pay for some of this, you can have an outright rebellion, which leads to politically the midterm elections being a disaster for him when they're just at a razor-thin margin now of being ahead in the House and even a small degree in the Senate.
So let's now bring into the conversation award-winning journalist and author Michele Norris. She is an MSNBC senior contributing editor. Good morning, Michele. Let's get you in on this conversation first, this idea that Trump voters, maybe even parts of his hardcore base, may have voted against their self-interest. Some would argue they did last time as well. But if Trump's proposals go through, whether it is about the social safety net or about some economic policies, they could really pay the price. But do you think that would change their loyalty to him at all?
You know, it remains to be seen whether it changes their loyalty, but it's going to be a pressure point for a lot of people. First of all, good morning, and thank you for having me. It's interesting because, A, there are contradictions, you know, the messaging that's coming out around immigration. On one hand, you have Holman talking about, you know, as if he's like the new sheriff in town, talking about these deportation centers. On the other hand, over the same period of time, you have Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk talking about increasing H-1B visas. So, you know, very different approaches to immigration there. But when you talk about the pain points, it's not just the voters who will feel, you know, maybe that they were duped in some way, but there are a lot of people who voted for this who thought maybe they would get an exception, including the farmers, including the business people who run meat packing plants. This is going to have a down the line effect if they're deporting large numbers of people And then suddenly there's not enough people to pick produce. There's not enough people to work in meatpacking plants. There's not enough people to work in construction. And the narrative that will come out of this is likely to be pain and chaos. And it might not change voters' loyalty to him in the short run, but I think Rev is right that it's going to create real problems for the Democratic Party in trying to attract those voters again for the midterm elections. And that's going to be a pain point for the Republicans themselves.